at least 2-3 weeks. All right, so shall we go ahead, Cassandra, and start?
Sure. So everybody in here is internal. A lot of you have been in the Open Arc meetings or Open Arch meetings, so some of this information will be redundant to that. But I know that we've talked a lot about making changes to Stalebot, and we've talked a lot about making changes to labels and prioritization. And we decided the next step for both of those is to draft up a SEP. And so right now what we're planning to do is create the SEP and release it in mid to late January, give the community time to review it, review the Stalebot SEP, and then start to implement some of those changes about Stalebot, basically to make sure that the tool is actually being used more effectively, outstanding issues are being addressed and taken care of. So that's the first thing. And then the second one is the same thing with the labels and prioritization. I know we've already started a SEP on labels. And so I think we'll put that out to the community in February, kind of get their feedback. One thing I'm still doing is educating myself on all of the steps of the SEP process. But for now, the plan is to release one in January, one in February. So any thoughts or questions or comments on that?
I'll just start off, Cassandra, with a comment. I think that makes a lot of sense from my side. And it reflects a lot of the feedback that we've gotten from the community itself. So I think, at least on my side, it will be good to publish this as well. For those who don't get a chance to listen to the video recording afterwards or so on, we may want to just post that and maybe even pin it, frankly, for a little while. Because I think this will be an important thing to get some, folks' attention to.
Yeah.
Tom, Diwas, Pedro, Tommy, anything on your side?
I agree with your suggestion.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so do we want to post it? Well, I guess I'll make a post that says that for people to watch for the SEP to come out this month, and then we'll post once the SEP is actually available so people can review it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think historically, because SEPs appeared in different times and so on, if we, to your point about getting the right cadence and everything, if everybody starts to relearn, that's where the SEP is and so on, then I'm hoping that we'll get folks to have more runway to look at the SEPs and give feedback, but also that, we catch as many people as possible.
Okay, so that's easy enough. And then the other thing that we were going to talk about, if nobody else has anything on the two SEPs, because SEPs now the next steps is to actually write them and publish them. If nobody has anything else to add about that, then we also know there's been a lot of conversation around documentation, improving the documentation, making it more effective. To that point, I know we have plans to roll out a documentation work group, and I believe Alyssa had a suggestion for somebody who may be interested in running that. Is that still the case, Alyssa?
Yeah, so the steps that we've taken so far are that we have mostly just created a Slack channel, and then I've met with a few of the people who are interested in joining the documentation working group. Alan Kugler from Terminal Labs is interested in being a captain for the working group, but we weren't sure about the process for nominating someone or even just kind of getting our working group up and going. So if anybody has suggestions on how we can recruit new members and start meeting regularly and get the team working, I'd love to hear that. I also have a documentation a document I can share that talks about some of Alan's ideas for improving the documentation.
Where is oh no, never mind. I was looking for the documentation channel there. I just joined it.
Yeah, Alyssa, I think just a couple of comments. I think in a moment we can ask Tom to just comment about the captaincy, because we started a little bit in the beginning, but we've also shifted part of the process. So we can make a comment about that in a moment. But I think if for those who might be listening to this call afterwards, in their own time, maybe Alyssa, you can just spend a few minutes giving the team a little summary around the type of things that came out of SaltConf around documentation, as well as the community members. I think that will hopefully entice the larger community to think through the type of, the scope and the type of areas we want to tackle. And then we can transition into how we make sure that we can get the right captain and to the logistics of how that works. But I think it might be a good forum for you to just give us a quick summary of what came out of your discussions, Alyssa.
That sounds good. So did you say you wanted me to do that at the end of the meeting, or would you like me to do that now?
No, if you can, now will be great.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. Okay, so we had about, I would say, 4 or 5 customers that met at SaltConf about the documentation working group. The general feedback that I got from that is one person I talked to who was also from Terminal Labs, but not Alan Kugler. He mentioned that some of our competitors have a market reputation for being much easier to use than Salt does. And a lot of that is because of our getting started guides and our documentation. Some of them are not as approachable for a new user. So that's probably an initiative that could be worked on to make things a little bit easier for users. Another initiative that I've heard this from several people, is that we need a lot more use case scenarios. We need examples of how to use Salt in context, for example, how would you use a module? Like, so you've got a module, great, I see what it can do, but help me to understand how I might actually apply this in my production environment. So I've had several calls to improve the documentation that way and provide more use case scenarios. And just general navigability, things like that, how to make it easier to navigate and search within the docs. I got some feedback that it would be nice if, I know that we can do this, but it's probably not prominent enough. We need, some of the users said, I want to be able to search by version number, and I know that you can do that, but maybe we need to somehow make that more prominent in the UI so that's clearer to users. Yeah, just things like that, just making it a little bit more accessible and easier to use for a new user.
Yeah, I think a lot of those make sense and consistent with what we've heard. I don't know if other team members had other things they wanted to share on the feedback that this work group would tackle. But it sounds to me, Alyssa, that the work group will actually try to prioritize these things and start to actively working on it. I know Alan Kugler, over the holiday period, was sharing with me that there's a lot of excitement from fellow members and, at projects that he's been working at, IBM and other places, to actually tackle this as a top priority. So I have no doubt in my mind that this will be a very active and a great work group to join, participate, and contribute to.
I also think it would be good for new users. It's a great working group for somebody who wants to contribute but doesn't know where to start. Documentation can be a really good first group to start with. Yeah,
that's a great point. Gareth or Diwaz or Pedro or Tommy or team, any thoughts, additional ones to what Alyssa said around the scope of the work group or things that we know they would want to tackle?
I was just going to say I would, excuse me, second Alyssa's suggestion and point about the examples. I've heard a lot of people talk about that this past SaltConf as well as like past ones, that the documentation is, as long as you know what you're trying to do or how you would use something, the documentation is really good. But again, like to Alyssa's point, like we lack examples of, okay, where would I use this module, or where would I use this state, or where would I use this piece of salt? So I think, my opinion, I think that should be like the first kind of task the working group should tackle. Like pick a module, pick a collection of modules, and like just come up with some like real life usage examples of how they would be used.
So another thing I'd like to say is that one of the main challenges why we've had problems with introductory documentation in the past there are a number of things that have caused challenges in the past here. One of them is just that there's a lot that you can do with SALT. And if we look at, when we say competing projects, a lot of competing projects, there isn't a whole lot that you can actually do with them. They're much simpler in and of their own scope. So it changes what that introduction looks like. One of the challenges that we've run into in introductory documentation is also that introductory documentation ends up being kind of hodgepodged together, or is written kind of with the wrong thinking or scope in mind. It would make a lot of sense if we mapped out what a new SALT user's journey would look like, right? What does it look like to have them doing something effective in their infrastructure in the first 2 pages of introduction without getting bogged down in terms and things like that, while also leading them from, hey, here's how you use SALT to solve common problem X. That's what we will introduce you with. By the way, here's how you use SALT to solve this other litany of common problems in these example scenarios. But another thing, for instance, that made the Django project take off back in the day when it took off was their introduction guide. I can't tell you how many people I ran into, especially in those days, that came back and said that they learned Python through the Django introduction. And similarly, that introduction, that prescribed path makes a lot of sense, as opposed to, again, one of the main challenges we've got is that we have a lot of tutorials. And we have a lot of, hey, here's an easy way to get started with SALT. But they're all over the place. They go in different directions. We really need that central prescribed thing. And that central prescribed thing also shouldn't be bogged down in terminology. It shouldn't be bogged down in, hey, you've got to memorize these 18 terms. It should be really easy to just say, hey, you learned 3 things, you got a certain job done, great. There's an accomplishment. And then now that you have this under your belt, here's the other things that you can tackle. So that it's very guided, it's very purposeful, it's very directed. Again, as opposed to the hodgepodge situation, which I feel that we have now.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Tom, and very insightful around some of the things. I think Alyssa, probably as a conduit of the work group and an enthusiastic member, you can capture that feedback and many of the other that might come after the call. And I think, of course, our next step is we have, a willing, team captain nomination. But per, anything in the community, we want to make sure that we have a chance for everybody else to step in or step up and nominate themselves. So Tom, maybe you can give a couple of comments around how we derived, the work group nominations last time for the other work groups, because that's essentially what Cassandra will be publishing out to the community, is a flow, Alyssa, around how others can nominate themselves. And then we'll get into the stage of closing that down and then getting the work group initiated. Tom, I don't know if you wanted to comment about the role of the captain, and loosely, the process will follow.
So from a process perspective, when we've been creating a new working group, the objective is less on, how do I put this elegantly without sounding like a CIA guy from the 60s? I just realized that reference might not stick for a lot of people.
I'm sorry, I'm Googling that.
Yeah, just look at how well we did with Guatemala. Anyway, and I'm saying that sarcastically, we did not do well with Guatemala. So it's more important that we get the group moving first, rather than introducing a democratic process first. I feel like it makes a lot more sense if we have someone who can give us a commitment that they want to be the captain and initiate that group. And we as a core team trust that person. then just go. We just assign them as the captain. It's more important to make decisions quickly and establish a foundation than it is to wait forever trying to get the nuances of a democratic process in place. Once the working group is up and functional, then it's much easier to come back and enforce terms and things like that. And so if we've got somebody who wants to be the group captain and we think they're going to do a good job and they're ready and raring to go, let's just do it, right? Just start going.
There you go, team. You just heard it. So you'll have a little window of time. If you're enthusiastic to jump in and contribute to this, then please jump in. Otherwise, within a short order, we'll be back out with this work group, hopefully within the next, no later than, a week or two, we'll have it up and running. There's been a lot of excitement for this work group to actually get started. And Alyssa, you'll be the custodian of the first set of feedback that you shared with us, because a lot of it had been funneled through you. So thank you for that. And we look forward to sharing the feedback on this work group.
Can I get so all of that is really helpful. Can I get just a few other bits of best practices from people who have been experienced with working with working groups? Can you just tell me some tips and tricks for how to make this working group as effective as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start. And Tom and Gareth, you've been on one, of course, working with it. So please feel free to share your insights as well on those. Pedro, you've been with a testing work group. So the first thing with all work groups, it's establishing upfront what the priorities are. Is very important, because everybody comes in with a view of what they think can be accomplished, what should be accomplished, and they may not be aligned. So very quickly creating that charter of priorities and getting the team aligned and enthusiastic around those priorities. And when is it that their own, priority issue will be addressed, and understanding when they can quickly get to it becomes important. That's always been one of the key successes, I feel, for any work group. The second is really making sure that we don't fragment this work group. This particular work group is, has the potential of tackling many areas: samples, new user versus established user, etc. And so, Gareth, maybe you want to mute. Sorry, I think I can hear you type your keyboard.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Making sure that it's not fragmented, where you have only one person on their own trying to work on a documentation here or so on, and is another way to rally, the force of the team. But again, this is if you want to do something, just go ahead and do it, contribute, get it in there. But as a work group, you're better off, of course, when more people are storming or swarming around one particular area and making it complete. Lastly, and now then I'll ask others to share their view, is really maintaining the cadence. So the work groups do meet frequently, and they actually have an established cadence. Different work groups have been at a different cadence. Pedro can comment around the testing work group one. But that's another one, Alyssa, that actually works very well in terms of making sure that the work group gets assigned. Different, by the way, tools and things like that, there's a lot out there that can be used. People sometimes just create simple GitHub issues, they assign them, people pick them up, and they start working on them, and they have a label of the work group. So those kind of techniques, of course, just, basic blocking and tackling and organization, at a simple, lightweight level goes a long way. Pedro or Gareth, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, for example, the testing work group, because testing salt and packaging salt is such a broad and massive subject, we struggled to keep the cadence, but we followed exactly the path that you suggested, Mo. So we created some topics, we prioritized, and each time we meet, we see where we stand, what we need to do, where to focus next, and things like that. I suspect that even though documentation is also a broad and huge aspect of SALT, that it might be easier for that working group. The testing working group also struggled because the SALT team was actively fixing testing issues. So we couldn't, there were some things that we were changing. So we decided to slow down the cadence of the testing working group so that we don't step on each other. But we are getting up to the point where we've fixed most of the issues. There are still a few lying around, but this year will be the year for testing work group for sure. But yeah, basically maintain a cadence. If the working group derails from the cadence, find out why. If someone else can help, don't take an issue solo. If someone else wants to pitch in, join team, it's also a chance to learn. And yeah, more or less that.
Cool, that's all really helpful. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Alyssa.
One of the things I was just thinking about, and I don't know if this would work. It might be a good kind of primer for a lot of the stuff that's been talked about so far, is to get some feedback from the internal study group that Alyssa, you started, just in terms of what those initial kind of use cases might be. I'm just thinking these sort of things ultimately would be best written by people who are just new to SALT.
Yeah, I
not
could
necessarily
see that.
new to SALT, but who are familiar with it, but maybe not necessarily know all the details.
Yeah, exactly.
Usage of it.
And just for everybody who might not know, I created a SALT study group that met back in December. We're going to start meeting in January, just for primarily non-tech employees who want to learn more about SALT and get a deeper understanding of how the product works, but starting from the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Alyssa. And so can we post the details maybe for the rest of the members of the community if they want to join this study group?
It's currently an internal group. It's meant for employees, but maybe we could expand. Maybe we could create a community version. That might be interesting. We'd probably get a different crowd that could be really helpful.
Yeah, that'll be great. Maybe Cassandra, you and Alyssa can noodle on this one and let us know if that's something we should pursue short term or long term.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. At a glance, I would say something maybe a little bit longer term so we can figure out what works and what doesn't internally, and then maybe implement that on a bigger scale. But definitely something we can think about.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
Okay, so documentation it is. Shall be the year of documentation.
Yeah, I mean, they're logistically, there are a couple things we have to work on. Obviously finding a time and a date and all that stuff, but I would like to have the first meeting scheduled for either late January or early February.
That sounds like a good plan. We also need to recruit a few members. We've only got 3 of us so far, and we're all connected to SALT in some way. So it might be good to figure out how we can evangelize it with the community a little bit more.
Exactly. That's kind of why I want to hold off and not do it tomorrow, is that it gives us time to
Agreed.
Promote, publicize, and let people know, hey, this is coming. I've already mentioned in the announcements channel as one of the responses to a comment about documentation. I said there's a work group coming up for people to be posted, but we can put up an announcement in Slack saying that the documentation work group is, we'll be meeting here the next month or so.
Cool, cool.
Okay. What's next, Cassandra?
That was it. Those were the main three things that I had, was kind of updates on where we stand on the other two kind of high priority agenda items. And these seem to be the top three things that people have had that they've wanted to have changed in the community. So I think we're off to a good start addressing
All right.
these three items.
That's great. And Diaz, do you want to give a quick highlight or update on Neon? You know, just the short version for those who are interested. I know everybody's busy, you know, trying to get that. We're doing, you know, the PR migrations and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the main thing to point out is that we're trying to get an RC out next week. So anything that needs to get merged in the next few days. As far as status wise, we're looking pretty good. We've made a pretty good progress in the backlog of PRs, new ones, as well as the ports that we have open. Although I know that we definitely have more work to do in that area as far as things that do not yet have pull requests open for porting. So we'll be working through that in the next release.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else from the team? Anybody wants to bring up anything worthwhile for the community, or any updates that we want to highlight?
I was just going to toss out a quick comment about Alan as the potential documentation working group. I think he'd be like an ideal pick to kick it off. A lot of his early contributions were documentation related, and he's familiar with how the process and the project works.
It's a great endorsement. Thank you, Gareth. Alan, if you're listening to this video, prepare, you know, free up the time.
And I take cash only, Alan, no checks for that endorsement.
Yeah. Hey, last year was all about Bitcoin. Now you're taking cash. All right, Tom, anything else you want to close off with? I think Cassandra's agenda is done. Mine is done.
I'm happy. I'm good.
That's great.
Got my spiel in on documentation.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. Cassandra, there it is. You can close us off.
All right. I will talk to y'all later.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Yep. Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year. Bye-bye.